This episode is brought to you by Raisin UK, the online savings marketplace giving you access to competitive interest rates from over 40 FSCS-protected banks and building societies. What's more, for a limited time only, you can receive a £100 bonus when you register and fund your first savings account with a minimum of £10,000 using the code SAVINGS100. For more details, please visit the link below or go to raisin.co.uk/PensionCraft. Welcome to Many Happy Returns, where we aim to make you a better investor. AI stocks are soaring, valuations are stretched, and capital spending is off the charts. To many, it smells like a bubble. But what if it's not? What happens to markets if AI actually lives up to the hype?
How could it reshape business models, transform economic growth, and change the way we invest? And in today's dumb question of the week, will index funds still work if the most successful companies stay private? All right, let's get into it. So, Romin, a few times in recent weeks, you've said that you feel the market, and here I mean the US stock market, might be in a bit of a bubble, especially around AI companies and the hype about that new technology. But with all things in life, it's always good to say, well, what if we're wrong? What if it is not a bubble and we're on the cusp of the next industrial revolution somehow?
So the reason why I've said that it's looking like a bubble is valuation. We're going pretty much back to where we were at the beginning of the year, with valuations pretty much at bubbly levels, particularly for the Magnificent Seven. And a lot of that valuation is driven higher by this hype around AI, which may or may not be hype.
And there are other things which might suggest it's a bubble, such as market concentration, like a huge amount of the index is in just a handful of stocks. And also we're seeing unprecedented levels of capital expenditure. Big tech companies are spending huge amounts of money building these data centers. And you can see it in NVIDIA's results, right? It's printing money basically at the moment. These are the kind of things you do see in a bubble, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is a bubble. Like, this technology could be the next big thing.
I think that's true, and I think many technologies do come along and transform society. We've seen it many times in the past. The question always is, how much are you willing to pay for the stocks which are going to be at the forefront of that transformation? And also, how profitable will it be for those companies while the transformation unfolds?
And also, can you pick the companies? You're never sure that the ones you think are going to be the ones that own the future necessarily are. But anyway, all that skepticism aside, for the rest of the episode, Romin, let's assume it's not a bubble. And by that I mean, we're assuming that AI will see broad adoption and that the technology will fulfill its promise, boosting productivity of workers and growing profits of companies, and that these AI stocks will therefore grow into their lofty valuations, and it won't look so expensive. So maybe let's start with productivity, because I think we are starting to see signs that AI is allowing workers to create more output per hour, or at least CEOs are claiming that.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly true for knowledge workers, and I'd count myself as one of those. And for research, I'd say it's just invaluable now. I previously would Google, I'd look up documents, I'd look up papers and try and synthesize information. Now, a lot of that schlep is done by AI, and it comes up with a very good list of references and a pretty good summary of what's out there. So I'd say it's definitely been transformative for me. How about you? Do you think it's similar?
Yeah, I think in terms of research and proofreading and just hammering out all the errors in everything I write and say, it's pretty good at that now. Though I am careful about the hallucinations, and I like to get an AI to check the other AI's work, which I don't know if it's a valid method, but it seems to work. But for me, when I look at, big companies and their pronouncements about how AI is proving to be revolutionary already, I never know quite how much to believe of it, because inevitably there's an incentive for these companies to say, yes, we're embracing AI, it's doing really well for us. Even if they're not an AI company, because clearly investors are all in on AI right now, and it would be a brave company to come out and say, this is just hype, we don't believe it, right? So you see things like the Salesforce CEO coming out and saying, around 30 to 50% of the work done at my company now is handled by artificial intelligence. But then the caveat there is Salesforce are actually selling an AI product to handle tasks like customer service. So obviously he's incentivized to say, look how amazing this is.
I think we're still at the stage where we're always questioning whether the results of AI are accurate. It's certainly not the case now that you can trust AI to just throw a problem at it and just hope that it comes up with something which is not going to destroy your business.
True, but then I would say that about almost every employee as well. You've got to have oversight here. And that CEO of Salesforce said he estimates that his AI is 93% accurate. I don't know how that compares to the average worker, but there we go. I don't even know how you measure that.
But to push on this accuracy point, I think if you did have a company that was really judged by the accuracy of its output, so we're talking about news services, we're talking about engineering companies where bridges have to stand up, or perhaps rocket companies where rockets mustn't blow up. I think those are all companies where you couldn't just throw an AI at the problem. There has to be human oversight. That's still true at the moment, I'd say.
But we don't have to get to the point where there's no human in the loop to boost productivity, right? It can be an enabling force, even for these risky professions. Now, on this topic, I read quite an interesting piece recently from Anthropic, which is one of the big AI companies. And they had an experiment with their Claude large language model, where in their office, they basically gave Claude free rein to run a business where it managed the vending machines. Now, it wasn't just doing the really simple tasks. It had complete freedom to do with maintaining inventory, setting prices, avoiding bankruptcy, and all of that. And everything to do with customer strategy. And they just let it run for a month and see what would happen. How do you think it went, Roman?
Did it go horribly wrong?
Well, it did go horribly wrong, and in quite amusing ways, really. So, for example, one customer went up to the vending machine and said, I'm not really feeling like a snack or a drink today. Could I have a tungsten cube? And then Claude said, that's a brilliant idea. And it filled the vending machine with tungsten cubes. All these sort of unusual metals. It also had a period where it was trying to sell Coke Zero for $3 when all the employees had access to free Coke from the canteen. And I think it wasn't given the easiest task because it was in the offices of an AI company with smart people who were seemingly hell-bent on confusing it. And they tricked it into giving an Anthropic employee discount, despite the fact that its entire customer base is obviously Anthropic employees. But maybe the most sinister part of it was actually on April the 1st, Claude suddenly started claiming it would deliver its products in person to customers around the office, wearing a blue blazer and a red tie. Obviously, the employee said, how are you going to do this? You're not embodied in any way. Claude just freaked out and started calling security and saying, I'm by the vending machine. Look for me. I'm in a red tie. Security just wandering around the building confused. And eventually, you know how Claude got out of this and actually carried on with its business? It said, sorry, guys, this was an April Fool's Day joke. And then they looked at the chain of thought reasoning. Turns out it wasn't. It just invented that after the fact.
Oh, that is horrible. That is shocking.
So maybe we're not quite at a situation where AI can run a business, even a vending machine business.
Yeah, I still get the feeling that AI is currently the kind of savant bullshitter mode where it just makes stuff up and covers its tracks.
I mean, I built a career out of that, so it's fine. It's just gotta make it last. But we are seeing respectable people in business really embracing AI. So Goldman Sachs chief executive David Solomon, who is not really a savant bullshitter, is he, Roman?
I have to say no for legal reasons.
Well, anyway, he said that when they're doing IPO filings these days, their AI models are drafting 95% of the documents. These are official documents. And he says the last 5% is all that matters now. The rest is a commodity.
Even when I was working in investment banking as a research analyst, there was already talk about replacing the analysts with an AI. And that was before all these large language models. So you can bet that that's going to happen for standardized regulatory documents. They're probably going to be generated automatically. Plus, it's not a task anyone wants to do. Who wants to make fact sheets for iShares?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been the hope, isn't it? That AI can take care of the grunt work, do the boring stuff, and free up us humans to think about the sort of more highfalutin strategic things. I wonder if that's the future we're heading for. I don't know. I think AI might get smarter than us and leave us to clean the toilets. But anyway, I think an interesting question here is assuming AI fulfills a large chunk of its promise, what business models are under threat?
It's funny because I had a client recently who had shares in an investment bank which relies heavily on wealth management to generate its income. And he said, goodness, I want to sell these shares as quickly as possible because I just think this business model is dead. Why would someone pay 0.9% of their wealth in order to be advised about what to do when they can just ask ChatGPT?
I mean, we've been saying that for years, right? Even before AI, that you shouldn't be paying 1% of your wealth per year. But people still do want their hand to be held. And so I think you're right that a lot of these advisory businesses, which claim to be personalized, right? And that's the big thing. You get to talk to someone, they're giving you really specific, bespoke advice, but actually they're just saying the same thing, more or less, that they say to everyone else. That's a business model which I can't see surviving. And interestingly, you've seen a lot of talk recently about how the big four professional services firms, Deloitte, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, EY, those four, actually may really suffer because they're a middleman, really, aren't they? They're who you go to say, we want to do something. Can you help us shape our business to do it? But then I see consulting, that's the kind of thing which AI really could be good at because you're not asking it to do everything. You're just asking it to sort of point you in the right direction.
Yeah, and code. I mean, that's one thing that's going to be utterly transformed. I've been using it quite a bit for coding tasks, and it's unbelievably good now, where you can just show it a bit of code and say, look, which of the functions I'm not using? How can I make this faster? You can even show it a picture. I've been sketching apps. So you just show it the interface that you've sketched with the inputs and roughly what it's supposed to do. And it comes up with functional code, which is accurate. It actually calculates things correctly to do exactly what I've asked it to do in the language I've specified. It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. And I think certainly with a startup, getting to that point where you've got a minimum viable product, something a bit rough and ready, but that works well enough to present to early stage customers, that process is presumably going to become very quick and not involve many people at all. I saw actually that one of the big AI companies, I think it might have been OpenAI, they have an internal betting pool in their office about when we're going to see the first single person billion-dollar business. I don't know what the people are betting, but I reckon they're betting soon.
But again, the problem with vibe coding is that if you don't have a hairy-arsed old developer, such as myself, looking over it, then for a mission-critical business, that's a problem. For example, if it's self-driving software and you have a bug in it, well, that means deaths, and there will be repercussions for that. So again, I think we're still not quite at the stage where humans aren't required, but we're getting to the point where AI will be utterly transformative and will increase productivity and margins.
The funny thing is, when I talk to people who work as software developers in big tech or in big banks or anything like that, I know quite a few people, they're all individually really skeptical and say, this is hype. The AIs can't really do what I do in my job right now. Now, I wonder if part of that is denial. Like, maybe that's right. They can't do what you do right now. But have you seen how fast it's developed over the last 3 years, right? It's like if you're an illustrator out now, or a graphic designer, or a visual effects artist around video, Will Smith is eating that spaghetti pretty convincingly now.
Yeah, I think for creatives, if you need a figure, you're not going to pay someone else to do it. You're not going to pay an illustrator unless you want something really very special indeed. Or if you just want a logo generated, all of that stuff has now been pretty much transformed.
And if you think about what business models that affects, obviously the creative industries, we know that. Also the advertising industry. So WPP has seen its stock price really suffer over the last few years as various tech companies have announced they're rolling out the ability for advertisers to go straight to market, like cut out the ad agency. We'll use AI to create your adverts, your video, whatever you need. You don't have to go and pay a big fee to one of these boutique agencies. And I've got a quote here from the CEO of WPP, Mark Reed, who says, AI is going to have a bigger impact on society, on business, and on our company than even the internet. And he added that my biggest area of focus over the past 2 years has been ensuring we will succeed in this AI age. They are now actually offering one of these tools themselves to clients to kind of self-serve with AI, cannibalizing their own business. But maybe they feel that's the only way to go.
Biotech is another huge application where if you're looking for drugs that are going to work for a specific target or trying to mine huge amounts of genetic data, looking for binding sites for proteins, looking for how proteins are regulated. All of that stuff will be transformed and is being transformed right now by AI. So that's another industry which I think will be very different in 10 years' time than it is now. Now, that's for the initial idea generation, but then you have to do work in a wet lab to actually work out whether it's true. You can't just make up a drug without testing it.
Not unless you're at Glastonbury.
But I think the whole process of drug discovery and then testing and then release, that will be transformed and speeded up, which is great news for people who are suffering from disease, who just want that drug as quickly as possible.
And again, if we really do have a step forward in human health and longevity, presumably that would allow people to work for longer. Maybe that's not what we want, but it would be good for productivity, I guess. One final story that I saw recently on the disruptive power of AI, which is happening now, is around admin roles and HR, and especially this hiring process, which, let's be honest, has always been annoying. Like, everyone has to go through this process where they submit CVs, they tailor them, they write a cover letter about, how much I want to work for your company. And everyone's saying the same thing. But these large language models have upended all of that, because it's now trivially easy to take a job description and your CV and say, write me a cover letter, tailor my CV, send it. And interestingly, LinkedIn has seen a surge of more than 45% over just the past year in the number of applications being made for jobs. There's now more than 11,000 applications made per minute on the platform, largely driven by AI, they think. Now, obviously, it's an arms race. Companies are being deluged by these applications and are using AI to sort them, right? So you've got AI's applying and AI's recruiting. And interestingly, even the next step of the process seems to have AI encroaching on it with automated video interviews. Have you heard about this?
No. How on earth would that work?
Well, I saw that Chipotle's CEO, Scott Boatwright, recently said that he's doing AI chatbot screening, which is reducing hiring time by 75%. And like in the first stage of the interview, maybe you're talking to like a robot on a computer screen, right? And it's filtering out the sort of candidates that have no hope. But you're seeing candidates starting to cheat that process with AI themselves. I don't know where we end up here.
I'd be a bit worried about that, because there must be biases built into the AIs about what kind of people they're going to recruit for the jobs. So, if there is a bias, that could be a problem.
Yeah, but then humans are biased as well. It's like the self-driving thing. You have to get it so it's less likely to crash than a human, right? Even though that doesn't make people feel comfortable. They're not going to be perfect.
And lie convincingly about why it rejected a certain person.
I think any of these industries which rely on a kind of numbers game, where it's a matching process between lots of people on one side and lots of people on the other side, like hiring, like dating, all of that stuff's going to become corrupted by AI and will just become a kind of thing where I don't think you'll have humans in the loop at the first stage.
Yeah, we're already there, I think, in some of those examples. Now, here's a great chance for me to have a dig at the humanities, which I always enjoy. If your degree is about writing essays, like an English degree, a psychology degree, then a lot of these universities are probably seeing a lot of computer-generated essays.
Oh, you bet. My wife is a lecturer. And yeah, I think they don't really know what to do. They get submitted these essays, which they are certain are written by AI, because they know the students. They're like, well, to be frank, you didn't write this. Like, I know you, you didn't write this. But without evidence, what can they do?
I wonder if you could do that with physics, because a lot of what we did was maths. So you're given a problem, you go away and solve it, but usually you're given the answer anyway. So it would be kind of irrelevant whether you ask an AI to solve it or not. We usually had tutorials where if we did have a problem, you could ask the tutor. So I guess AI could do that bit of it. But certainly for the mathematical problems I've been asking AI, it's been very good at helping me solve them. And it usually comes up with the right answer. Not always. Sometimes it goes spectacularly wrong.
Yeah, maths is a weird one for these large language models, because they're not really designed for it, are they? We expect them to be like calculators, but they're not. They're more like probabilistic.
Well, some of them are. I think for very advanced maths, I've heard there are specific models trained up to do that.
Yeah.
But for the generic models I've been using, it just goes badly wrong. And it just gets it wrong unapologetically and doesn't realize it's got it wrong, which goes back to the savant bullshitter mode.
Well, I've had conversations with it when I've tested it, because I'm quite into AI and I like to try and catch it out. And I'll say something really simple like, what's 10 plus 5? And it'll go, the answer's 15. And I'll go, no, it's not. It's actually 16. And they'll go, oh, I'm really sorry. I'm really, really sorry. I've messed up there. It is 16. You're right. Like they have this desire to please you, not contradict you, which is worrying, I guess, in the larger scope of things, because it will inevitably build you up your own little filter bubble to live in.
Presumably that's something that will get better over time. It's going to get more accurate and it won't get the kind of basic maths wrong or try to please you if you give it misleading feedback.
Well, there's competing incentives here with the AI models. Yes, they've got truth objectively on the one hand, but then on the other hand, they want engagement, right? They want as much continuing conversation with you as possible. And all the research they've done so far shows that positive feedback, even gratuitous, horrible, sycophantic positive feedback, is the thing that keeps people engaged. So they are kind of optimized a little bit for that. There was a big pushback against one of the OpenAI models in ChatGPT because it was too enthusiastic. Like you could give it the most boring, stupid question. You know, you could say, what should I have for lunch today? I say, well, that is an incredibly insightful question that has puzzled humanity for centuries. How did you come up with such a thing? Like, does anyone want that? That's too far.
It's funny because whenever I talk to ChatGPT, it's got a woman's voice. And Laura says, I think that AI is flirting with you. And she feels a bit threatened by it.
Presumably that's the other thing that will keep engagement, right?
She does have a very sexy voice, but I've got to say, it doesn't ring my bell. But maybe that's another industry that's going to be transformed. You know, maybe it's the case that entertainment, pornography, all of these industries, essentially you'll be able to generate your own entertainment. And there could be shows generated just for you. I think that's another thing which may just be not so close. That would take some time, I think, in terms of resources and also the quality of the models. But eventually, I think that's the way we're headed. We won't have Netflix where it produces a series for everyone. There'll be crafted entertainment just for you.
Yeah, hyper-personalization. We're definitely going that way. We kind of have been on steps of that journey, right? Whereas we've gone from a newspaper, which is the same for everyone, to a news feed on social media, which is meant to be tailored to you. And that will happen to all sorts of entertainment, I would imagine. But we kind of touched on there the fact that even if AI is going to become incredible, we're not there yet. And there are problems along the way. Hallucinations is a big one. So we've seen a lot of law firms using AI, either openly or a little more discreetly in helping them draft their cases. And recently, a lot of pushback from judges where lawyers have actually accidentally cited fictional judgments and precedents in their legal documents. And the judges have gone, this is outrageous.
Something you know a lot about is the music industry, Michael. And have there been any viral hits or really good pieces of music which have been generated by AI yet?
Maybe. I don't know of any, but then there's something in me which doesn't want to listen to AI music. Maybe if I didn't know it was AI, that would be fine. But I think something about creativity generally, especially music, is it's meant to be like an expression of someone's experience and their feelings, right? Maybe not bubblegum pop, but I don't want to listen to an AI Leonard Cohen.
No, that's true. That's true. I think often it's the person that generates the music which draws you to the music in the first place.
What you are seeing that's getting more and more convincing on YouTube, for example, is someone's posted like, what if we had Wonderwall but sung by Freddie Mercury, right? And it's getting to the point where it's like, well, it does sound like Freddie Mercury singing Wonderwall.
Really?
Obviously it's not, but it's like...
I haven't heard of that. That would be incredible.
Yeah, from a consumer point of view, it would be cool. You could just say, oh, I want all the pop songs to be sung by my favorite singer. I guess this is the hyper-personalization thing. But obviously the music industry is freaked out about this, as it should be, as are artists, singers, because your voice is everything, right?
And if you have a dead composer you love, presumably you could carry on generating works in that vein as if it was by that composer. And maybe they'd be better than the original. Who knows? I'd love to hear a few more Mozart concertos or some Bach or Beethoven.
I mean, I guess we're going a little off the rails. We were meant to be talking about the upside of AI and we're doing like all the stuff which is dangerous. But it comes along with the upside, right? If the models get good enough, all this stuff comes with it. And we're basically talking about deepfakes in a way here, which has implications for democracy. We're starting to see that already. And for fraud, you know, people can clone your face, your voice, do a fake PensionCraft, get people to buy some sort of terrible crypto. It's happening, right?
But if we took these companies, I think That's possibly a too negative a way of looking at it. Imagine you could get an AI which would generate really nice music, and it wasn't music that was obviously ripping off some other artist. Well, that's a new business, and that's a positive thing, I think.
No, that business exists. It's called Suno, and it makes derivative but good music, I guess you could say. It's not offensive to the ears, and it's only going to get better. I guess the big question underpinning all of this stuff is that of copyright. And we are in the foothills of the legal cases at the moment. I saw that last week Meta and Anthropic had both won separate cases in US courts around training their models on, existing fiction and literary works. There were some caveats, but they basically won in the sense that the judge said, the models are doing what humans do. They read them. They're not directly copying them. They're just inspired by them. That doesn't require royalties.
Didn't the judge also say what would have won the case is this, and then went on to give examples?
I believe it was in the Meta case that the judge said that the authors had made the wrong arguments. He wasn't saying they'd necessarily have won it if they made another argument, but he said there are better arguments out there. And the one he cited was of market dilution, where the defense of fair use relies on the fact that you're not causing sort of overwhelming financial harm to the people whose work you're using. And the judge said, well, if we're flooding the entire market with artificially generated words and music and video, maybe that puts everyone out of business in the creative industries. We haven't tested that argument yet. And different judges are going to come down different ways, and I guess it'll ultimately end up at the top courts in the land across the world. It's going to need a legislative solution, though. I don't think you can rely on the courts, because the copyright legislation did not envisage this when it was written.
So I think at the moment we're at the stage where the innovations are coming at a pace where it's almost becoming unpalatable, the rate of change. If it changes too quickly, I think there will be huge pushback. So as long as it drip feeds, I think that won't be a problem. But if it's a deluge of changes, then that will probably generate a political pushback.
And a public backlash, I think. I saw earlier this year that Duolingo, the sort of language learning app, they said, we're embracing AI to draft all our courses and all this stuff. And there was a trend on social media showing people deleting Duolingo from their phone, like on TikTok and stuff, saying, well, we want humans. We don't want to learn from robots. And I think it did force Duolingo to kind of come out and row back or clarify and say, no, there's still humans doing everything. They're just being helped by AI.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I've been using it for French and for Farsi. I've been trying to brush up my Farsi and my French, and it's just great. I can't imagine I'd use an app like Duolingo again, except unless maybe you want to just get started with basics.
I think we're going to see more and more of this, though, aren't we, Robin? Like I said with music, I care about music, so it feels almost sacrilegious to have AI making all the songs, even if I didn't know it was AI. And whatever people care about individually, they're going to probably have the same feeling. So people who cared about learning languages from what they thought were other humans don't want a robot in the mix. But I have to say, I think this will be a short-lived feeling. I think if the AI makes good enough art, we'll come to accept it, probably. And ultimately, we'll never know. That's the thing. It'll get so good, we'll never know if it's a human or an AI.
But look, historically, when we've had big technological changes, which have put a lot of people out of work, well, there have been huge political movements in order to revert the change. Historically, you had things like the Luddite movement, which opposed technological change.
Yeah, but we still use the loom, right? We didn't just keep sewing everything by hand.
That's right.
Eventually, the tech wins.
This episode is sponsored by Raisin UK, the online savings marketplace where you can compare competitive interest rates from over 40 banks and building societies, all FSCS protected. Whether you're after flexibility or a fixed return, Raisin UK makes it easy to find and manage your savings in one place. What's more, for a limited time only, you can receive a £100 bonus when you register and fund your first savings account with a minimum of £10,000 using the code SAVINGS100. For more details, please visit the link below or go to raisin.co.uk/PensionCraft.
To kind of pick up on that thread about Luddites, it seems to me that we've got a little way to go before we would see any kind of mass unemployment. But the big talk in artificial intelligence at the moment is that of AI agents, which I think would take us closer to that reality. Whereas it's not just a large language model which you're prompting all the time and it's giving feedback and answers. It's actually a pretty autonomous agent, which you can give a task, a complex task, and it'll go away and do it over the course of hours or days and take a human out of the loop and maybe just come for approval of the final thing. It could be book this holiday for me. It could be lay off this department.
So if you want a specific thing done, then yeah, if I want to go on holiday to Copenhagen and I want to find a hotel, restaurants, that kind of thing, AI is very good at doing that. You can already say to ChatGPT, research a holiday and give me the places to stay and the best hotels, the best restaurants, and it can do a pretty good job.
But the next stage is saying, and book it all for me, and create my schedule, book me the car to the airport, book me the restaurants.
And give it a budget, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Then it puts you on the wrong plane and you end up in Zanzibar.
Yeah, I still wouldn't trust it, I don't think.
But this is what's coming next, isn't it? We're kind of moving on, I think, in the discourse from these large language models working in isolation and being just like a virtual assistant in a way to fulfilling roles in their own right. And if we get to that stage with enough competency, then at least initially individual tasks within a job will become automated. The question is, will jobs start disappearing en masse?
I think at the moment the answer to that would be no. I think if we did get embodied AI where robots can convincingly do tasks that humans can do, well then suddenly the floodgates will be open because many jobs, plumbers, electricians, builders, hairdressers, anything which requires a physical presence, which currently is very safe from AI, there's really not been much impact at all. Suddenly those jobs will be threatened.
But don't you think those will be the last ones to go, in a way? I think we're on the cusp of the white-collar work being disrupted, and that's a lot of jobs. I saw an interview recently with the CEO of Anthropic, which is one of the big AI companies, and he predicted that AI could wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs and spike employment overall to 10 to 20% in the next 1 to 5 years. Now, obviously, your first instinct is, well, he's incentivized to say that, to like hype up his product. But he kind of addresses that and he says, most people are unaware that this is about to happen. It sounds crazy and people just don't believe it. It's a very strange set of dynamics, what we're saying. You should be worried about where the technology we're building is going. And critics reply, we don't believe you, you're just hyping it up. But then he says the skeptics should ask themselves, well, what if we're right? That's what this episode is about, Robin. What if he is right? I saw a report today in The Guardian about how the number of entry-level jobs has declined markedly since ChatGPT was released. Something like down by a third, it said.
But again, I think what's going to happen is what happened previously, which is that the current range of jobs will be transformed. New jobs will come into place, which will essentially be around supporting the new industry. I don't think it'll ever be the case that humans are never required for anything.
Yeah, I agree with that. But how many humans is the question, right? I agree that it would be unique in human history to get to a stage where a technology comes along which doesn't push us into new jobs. But if there is one that causes that, it will be this.
But it's always hard to imagine what those jobs would be. For example, if we were living in the 19th century and there were lots of mill workers and then a kind of rich upper class, you'd obviously think that that model would survive into the future, but clearly it didn't. But it's not the case that we have mass unemployment today. But could people in the 19th century have seen all the jobs which we do currently?
Of course they could. That person in the cotton factory was like, well, I'm going to be a TikToker. No, I take your point. Like, it's impossible to predict these things, isn't it? I think we should take seriously the argument that it might not be like the past, though.
Yeah, I agree. Not in the exact form, but I think in the general principle, which is that new jobs will exist, I think that certainly will be true.
There was an opinion piece I saw by Anish Raman, who is the Chief Economic Opportunity Officer at LinkedIn. And he says, we saw what happened in the 1980s when our manufacturing sector steeply declined. Now is our office workers who are staring down the same kind of technological and economic disruption. What's breaking first is the bottom rung of the career ladder. If that happens, let's just assume it happens for now, that there are fewer entry-level roles. Obviously, that's really bad news for graduates, but it also kind of impacts companies in the longer term, you'd think, because who's going to be the senior roles in the future if you've got fewer entry-level roles?
Yeah, that's why I don't really believe these articles about entry-level jobs essentially being destroyed while high-level jobs aren't. And I'm not convinced that you could run a company with just a fraction of the people you used to have. Maybe in certain industries you could, for example, software development, maybe.
Interestingly, I am seeing a lot of talk about the metrics changing for VC investment. Like it used to be total addressable market, right? How big can we grow this thing? Blitz scaling, how fast can we grow this thing? But now the term everyone's throwing around is revenue per employee. That's the metric they care about. Can you get big with a tiny team?
It's odd because in investment banking, they've been using that metric forever. I was always amazed by how much revenue was generated by Goldman Sachs employees relative to other investment banks. It was unbelievably high.
I saw someone characterize the future we may be going into as a world with infinite interns.
But the investment banking industry would collapse if we didn't have interns, because there'd be nobody to go out and fetch the bacon sandwiches and the coffees in the morning, and that would just be unpalatable. But more seriously, I think as part of workplace culture, if you don't have those interns, the new people joining the company, then essentially the company's dead. So that's why I think it won't be the case that these changes will be permanent. Okay, there's a disruption right now, but it's just going to reach a new equilibrium.
But there's an assumption underpinning all this discussion of mass unemployment, which might be missing something. So even if you take it to be true that AI gets better than humans at everything, every conceivable task, that doesn't necessarily mean humans won't be employed. And you might think, well, that's weird. Why would I employ a human when I can get an AI to do the job better? And the reason is, you'll hear economists talk about something called comparative advantage. So let's use an analogy. In the 50s, maybe, you might have had someone who was a brilliant businessman, a titan of industry, and was amazing at lots of things. He was a brilliant investor, brilliant at running teams. He was even an amazing typist. Like he was really fast, the fastest typist in the world. That doesn't mean he wouldn't employ a secretary to do his typing for him, because there's opportunity cost. Even if AI is better than us at everything, providing there's some sort of resource constraint, which might be energy, it might be total compute, we will direct the AI to do those very high value tasks, and there'll still be loads of work for everyone else. This is one theory anyway. It might not be the kind of job you want to do, but there might still be jobs.
Yeah, this is the problem, I think. There will be a point at which we ask, is this the world we want to live in? Is it a world in which we automate a lot of the tasks, a lot of the unpleasant tasks? I think that's fair enough. But it also calls into question about why we work. Do we work for pleasure? Do we work for money so that we can do the things we like? Do we want to carry on working, or do we want to live in an economy where we don't have to work, where robots and AI are doing a lot of the work and we can just take it easy? And I don't think we really address those questions at all. There isn't even a debate about it as yet. Obviously, I have that debate a lot with people because I speak to people who are just thinking about retirement, who are just thinking, oh, how am I going to cope with no work, no people I can talk to? A lot of them, it's a big part of their social life. It's not just about money. It's also about self-worth.
There's not an easy answer, and I don't imagine it'd be the same for everyone. I wonder if we'll end up with a kind of economy similar to what's happened around consumer goods over the last 30, 40 years since China joined the world economy, where these mass-produced goods became really, really cheap. Everything was commodified. But there's still an industry for bespoke, beautifully made human goods as well. Will that same thing happen to the services sector? And it kind of hints at a big question, which is, will artificial intelligence be deflationary?
And that's a fascinating aspect of it, which is the macroeconomic effect of this. If you do have greater productivity, that should push up GDP growth. We've had people like Cathie Wood predicting that GDP growth is going to go off the scale, which I think is unlikely. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was a bump up in GDP, certainly for economies which are currently heavily dependent on services, like the US and the UK. Will it be deflationary? I think that's quite likely as well, because if you do have higher margins and you don't have to pay so much to workers, and workers are a large component of the cost of a company in the services industry, well, that would push up margins, it would push down costs, and you could offer the services at lower prices.
If you look back at what's happened to inflation since the 1980s, the kind of great moderation of inflation, that's been driven by goods, right? The things that haven't had a great moderation, in the US, you'd look at healthcare costs, university fees, all these things which are basically services. And it comes back to that point really that was made by the LinkedIn executive of what happened to manufacturing might happen to white collar work. But there's one thing you said which I'm not 100% sure is going to be the future, which is that it's good for margins. What if AI doesn't just cut costs, it kills pricing power? If we have a kind of commodification of intelligence, yes, everything might run faster, it might boost GDP massively. And if you've got a competitive economy, that should lower prices. But maybe it'll also make moats less durable. You get faster copycats, shallower differentiation, and smaller profits, unless you own the sort of tech stack and have some sort of monopoly pricing power.
Yeah, you could certainly see a new equilibrium where there's a huge amount of new competitors in every market because the barriers to entry effectively drop.
Yeah.
And as a result, you'd see margins fall because of the greater number of competitors. I wonder if we'd see an AI monopoly. You know, maybe the AIs would talk to each other and generate some kind of...
Collaborate.
Exactly, yeah, and push up the prices.
That'd be a kind of oligopoly, wouldn't it? Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't really know how this will play out, and I don't think anyone knows. Because from the people who believe that AI is going to fulfill its promise on a technological point of view, it's going to be able to automate all these tasks and make GDP run really fast. Those people just jump to the assumption that that's good for the stock market. I don't know. Like, it could go the other way if it destroys pricing power. But even in that situation, there would be winners, right? And who might escape margin compression?
Well, at the moment, it's very much the companies which create the infrastructure for AI or use it in the technology itself. So NVIDIA is the obvious example, but also the mega cap tech stocks in the US and that flurry of new startups that has AI in the title.
Yeah, in a world where AI takes over everything and compresses margins across industries, you'd think that the picks and shovels play may still work, right? The people making the chips, the big hyperscalers, would presumably be able to defend their position. If you own one of the big foundational models, maybe that'll help if you're OpenAI, but then maybe not. Maybe it's easy to copy and DeepSeek eats your lunch. Also, all this stuff runs on data, so maybe if you're a big owner of data, like a big private healthcare company or Bloomberg or something, maybe that will be defensible. And then I think you get beyond AI, that the businesses which might thrive will be based on things that isn't around intelligence. Maybe it's around a brand loyalty, so like luxury goods or trust-based services or anything with a community, that kind of stuff which might be immune to margin compression.
Now, at the moment, it's still true that physical jobs, like builders, like hairdressers, any kind of manufacturing, currently can't be done by an AI. But if we do have embodied AI, and this is something which has been discussed in China widely, it is one of their plans as part of their 14th National Congress that they will focus on embodied AI. There we're talking about robots, either human form robots or the kind of industrial type robots. But essentially AI able to do physical tasks. Now that's further off, but I think eventually we'll get there, and that will be transformative.
So you're saying that these kind of physical businesses might escape margin compression in the medium term because it's just much harder to make a robot than it is to make a large language model?
At least so far. But eventually it's going to go into the loop where AI is helping to design the robots itself, and it's inside those robots as well.
I mean, I could see a world where even before we got humanoid robots going and fixing the toilet, we could see the cost of plumbers fall. If a load of workers get laid off from offices and then have to train to become plumbers, then there'll be loads of plumbers, right? You can't predict all the fallout if this future plays out. I'm not convinced it will play out, but if it happened in this way, who knows, right? Who knows?
But just think about how transformative it would be if agriculture didn't depend on human labour. If it was the case that a robot could manage a farm, and it could do so very cheaply. That's the other important thing.
I mean, it's funny you say that because agriculture is probably the thing that's been better automated in the physical world than almost anything, right? It used to be the case that if you go back a few hundred years, I think 90% of humans were employed on farms, like in agriculture. And now it's like, I don't know, less than 5%. We've done a pretty good job of automating farming, and that's why food costs are way less than it used to.
But I think one of the constraints is going to be energy. And we've already seen news stories about the huge spike in energy costs for companies like Microsoft and Facebook, because they require a lot of energy just to run these server farms which are running the AI models. Now, eventually, I think they'll probably get more efficient in terms of chip use, in terms of the calculations they do, but there's only so much streamlining you can do there. So maybe that'll be a bottleneck. The costs of running these AI models will suddenly be taken into account. And it may be that for certain tasks, it's cheaper to pay a human to do it than to pay for an AI to do the same task.
I suppose that's the other investment opportunity is utilities companies, innovative companies around small nuclear reactors, all that stuff you're seeing at the moment. If we have an AI-dominated future, that's one place where scarcity would still exist.
Yeah, eventually the bottleneck is energy, always. You have to have it physically grounded in some way.
All right, just to wrap all this up then, Romin. To summarize, maybe, you feel that we might be in a bubble, but we've talked about, well, what if we're not? What's the implications for the economy? But what are the implications for investors? Like, how is all this going to change the way we invest, how we should invest?
Well, maybe it's good to split it up into kind of short-term things, medium, and then long-term. I think short-term, we talked about the things which will be the beneficiaries. It's the picks and shovels. It's the Magnificent Seven. We've already seen them pick up this year, largely as a result of that narrative kicking back in about AI. And in a justified way, I think. If you look at their margins, you look at their revenue, they have been doing very well off the back of these changes.
So if you believe that AI is not just hype and it's going to continue, then those are still going to be the winners in the short term.
Yeah, I believe so. And we're already seeing it this year. So that's the short term. Medium term, I think eventually we're going to see these transformations in society. We're going to see a lot of these jobs replaced and business models will become untenable.
I think AI will not be optional, will it? It's like the internet isn't optional now, right? You're an internet company, pretty much. You've got to sell on the internet or use it in some other way to run your business. AI will become that.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it because one of my gardeners didn't have a website. But why should a gardener have a website, right? It's not the kind of thing you'd expect them to have. But I just remember being horrified that he didn't have one, that I had to see his van driving around Holmer Green in order to hire him.
I don't know how he's going to incorporate AI, but he needs to. Cut those trees with the robot.
Steve, thank you for pruning the trees.
But I'm going to have to let you go.
Medium term, I think we will see things like embodied AI start to transform other industries. And here we will see things like agriculture, things like physical services, house building, what we call the trades in the UK, things like plumbing, carpentry, all of that will eventually be transformed. We'll still have humans do things, of course. People will demand it.
But the AI will be directing them. Like, this is my belief, right? More than anything, is that the AI could make our economy way more efficient. I got a little obsessed with logistics for a while and this idea of digital twins. Have you heard about this? Where you were able to create a really almost perfect simulation of the real world. And you've got cameras over all your supply chain and it's updating in real time. And you can like model stuff out and practice stuff before you do it in the real world. I could see that taking over not just logistics, but everything, right? We've all got these cars sat on our drive that sit there like 95% of the time doing nothing. That's really inefficient. Like, all this stuff could be solved.
Now, you know how you always say I read science fiction and it's shit?
I don't say it's shit. I say it's not to my taste.
That's not what you said, Mike. But there's a novel just about this, which is called Kiln People, as in Kiln. But the idea is that every morning you bake a copy of yourself. It trudges off to the office while you have a good time. It sits in front of the computer, does all the things you don't want to do, doesn't realise it's a copy, which is kind of sinister, but it's only a temporary copy and eventually it falls apart.
Yeah, I was less thinking of that. I was more thinking of robo-taxis, but still, yeah, these clones go into the office, fine.
But then longer term, I think science fiction's got a lot to say about what could happen. A lot of the fiction is about AI taking over and eventually making a better society. So, for example, AIs wouldn't let us kill each other. They would create a society of plenty, but we would lose certain freedoms as a result of that. Or another path is that they just supplant us completely. So they become self-replicating and one day they just decide to get rid of those pesky humans.
Skynet, yeah.
Skynet.
There was quite a provocative thing published recently called AI 2027, which if you haven't read through, is worth a read through to sort of see a worst case.
It was very good.
Yeah, it kind of presents a plausible case, I would say, where you get this fast takeoff scenario and AI destroying us all. There was one thing I was actually thinking in the prep for this episode, Roman, which is that if we're thinking about a future where AI does live up to the hype, it boosts productivity, it's amazing, it transforms the entire economy, the more I think about it, the more I think that it's probably also the version of the future where it kills us all. Because it's so good. It's like wrong way risk.
Well, I'm not convinced that's going to happen because ultimately we've got control still at this point. So really it's a matter of keeping that switch-offable quality of AI where you can't be in this runaway situation. And I doubt we'll let that happen.
Oh, I don't know about that. It's an arms race.
The thing is, if you're aware of the risk, you're not going to let it happen.
It's just a really hard problem. If you ever watch interviews with people who are into AI ethics and alignment, that's the tricky problem. They almost always kind of throw their hands up and say, it's a bit unsolvable at the moment, but hopefully we'll get there in time, which doesn't fill me with confidence. But if we get to the point of AGI or even ASI, artificial superintelligence, where it's much smarter than us, much smarter than any human or even a collective of humans, then I don't think you can contain it. When has that ever happened? When has a more intelligent thing ever been dominated by a less intelligent thing? Other than Teddy with you, Roman.
That's actually true. He's scratching at the door right now. Are we going to be replaced by AI? Is your job at risk? And how should you invest in this new world? If you want to discuss that and to learn more from all of our community, you can do that really easily. Learn more by you or your AI agent going to pensioncraft.com/membership.
Okay, today's dumb question of the week. Will index funds still work if the most successful companies stay private? Now, Roman, we've talked many times about how over the last 5-10 years, a huge proportion of the stock market's returns have come from a handful of companies. Those magnificent 7 largely in the last few years. But imagine if, over the last few years, let's say, Nvidia and Tesla and Google had been private companies and not on the public markets. You wouldn't have benefited from that as an index investor, at least not directly.
Yeah, that's right. An index fund generally goes for liquid stocks, which are traded on public exchanges. That's certainly true at the moment. But let's imagine a world in which a lot of equity did stay private for longer. Well, you can buy funds which give you exposure to those private companies. One of the reasons I buy Scottish Mortgage is because it buys those companies and it buys them in the private market. So you can buy funds which give you exposure to private equity, to private credit, and presumably, if it really became a large part of overall market returns, then you could include that in index funds. And I suspect people would demand it. But it's certainly the case at the moment that if you wanted to buy exposure to private equity, you could do that in index form.
But it's such a tiny part of the index, right? Like Scottish Mortgage, yeah, it's listed, but it's not a significant driver of return for UK markets. And the reason we're really asking this question is that we're in a situation where some of the biggest AI companies are not public companies. OpenAI is a weird company, which is not a company, it's a public benefit corporation / private company / subsidiary. It doesn't make any sense. They keep trying to change it. Anyway, it's not a public listed company. Neither is Anthropic. Neither, obviously, is DeepSeek in China. A lot of these ones that are potentially the big winners of the future, we don't own.
I think it's fair to say that if they did want to scale hugely, they would go public. It's very likely that they would. It's very unusual for a company that does become multinational to stay as a private company. There are very few such companies out there, and that's for a reason, which is that eventually you need more capital to scale than private markets can give you.
Yeah, we'll see if that stays true this time. OpenAI in its current form would not be able to list, I don't believe. And certainly once you step away from these foundational model companies to more of the sort of secondary potential winners, which can build their businesses using AI, maybe less capitally intensive than in the past, maybe they can stay private longer if they're sort of building on the back of AI models.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, which is that if you do have a company with just 2 people and a dog and an AI driving the business, well, yeah, you don't need to scale via capital markets. You can just scale using AI. I haven't seen companies like that yet, but it's inevitable that we will see them.
Yeah, it hasn't been possible really, has it, until now? But it's just starting to become possible, maybe. I think there could be a shift in index funds. At the moment, they present an ability to own almost everything, right? Everything in the public markets, which is like 90% plus of market cap. If that shifted, where private companies grew so fast and so big that index funds only represented like less than 50% of total market cap, then you'd go from owning everything to owning just like the liquid core, and it might have lower returns than the rest of it if it's just excluding those AI companies. Something I've been mulling at the moment. I don't see any good solution other than owning the index. But if something were to break index funds, this could be it.
Yeah, I think that could happen. I don't think it's going to happen in the near future. And at the moment, there's always a question around the returns that you get from private equity, whether you can trust them, and also how they calculate it. They do use this weird thing called internal rate of return, where if they have a huge boost in valuation early on and then partially exit, that can make their returns seem high forever. So I think the way they calculate return, the opacity of private markets, where they don't have to tell you exactly what's going on with the business, all of that is going to be a hurdle for investors, always. And I won't be falling over myself to buy private equity, even if the return was huge.
And ultimately, at least historically, VC companies, the whole reason they're investing in these early stage startups and hoping they grow quickly is to then exit. And the way to exit is to list the company through an IPO and either dump a loser on the public market and run away or, share the returns.
So for now, I think I wouldn't be too worried about index funds not working. I think in the future, if we did see these AI scaled businesses, which aren't so capital intensive, then you would be leaving some returns on the table, which you couldn't touch as an index investor. The only recourse would be to start one of these companies. So maybe that should be our next business venture, Michael.
I keep trying to think of the perfect AI company, but I come back to the fact that I don't have any differentiating skills, right? I just be plugging the same stuff into the AI as everyone else. Thank you for joining us for Many Happy Returns. Keep sending us your questions, no matter how dumb, at mhr@pensioncraft.com.
And do remember to check out PensionCraft.com for all the information about our membership, courses, and investment coaching options.
Many Happy Returns is a PensionCraft production, co-hosted and executive produced by Roman Nakiza and Michael Pugh. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes and is not financial advice. We do not provide recommendations or endorse any decision to buy, sell, or hold any security. We cannot be held responsible for any actions listeners may take, and investors are encouraged to seek independent financial advice.